France has suspended a controversial gas tax hike. The announcement comes after weeks of violent clashes between police and so-called yellow vest protesters.
Several people have been killed in the riots. Hundreds of others have been injured and arrested since Saturday. Most of the protesters include men and women living in the suburbs who depend on their cars to get to work. So for more on this, we want to bring in CBSN contributor Alex Kliment. He writes for Signal, a newsletter produced by GZero Media. So we've been watching this crazy video from, it looks like Paris is burning. I mean, these protests look pretty intense. And now the French government is bending to the will of the people.
Well, these protests began 2 weeks ago in response to a French government proposal to raise taxes on fuel. And the aim of that tax was twofold. One was to raise revenue, and the other was to help reduce carbon emissions. The people weren't having it because at a time of rising oil prices, gasoline was already getting more expensive. And so the issue at first was narrowly about that fuel tax. Was that fair in a context where, wealthier people are getting tax breaks and the middle class is getting squeezed? And it really morphed into a broader protest movement that's about frustration with Macron's, both his style, President Emmanuel Macron, both his style, which is very sort of aloof and imperious, and also this very specific policies in which his fiscal reforms had been squeezing the lower middle class while appearing to help the wealthy.
So it started out with this specific grievance, but it expanded. The yellow jacket sort of what they were after from the government has gotten a lot larger.
Well, it's a sort of amorphous movement, right? There's no actual leaders. The demands that you do hear from the yellow jackets are often contradictory. Some want tax cuts, some want more spending, some want new elections, some want various other things. There's no real leadership. Radicals from the left and right have sort of tried to cotton themselves onto the movement without much success. So it's sort of an amorphous movement, but it's quite an interesting phenomenon. I mean, remember that Macron himself was elected by leading what was essentially an anti-establishment, outsider, popular movement. Now he faces the biggest test of his presidency when he's faced with a movement of that kind himself.
Yeah, but yet very early on for him, even though clearly, the French wanted an outsider, very early on he was struggling in terms of his approval ratings. They've never really been that great. What does this mean for him moving forward, and will he be able to keep his job?
Well, he came to the presidency seeking to address several challenges in France, right? It's a country with high employment, relatively low growth, relatively weak innovation, and he had a lot of reforms he wanted to push through. Labor reforms, pension reforms, tax reforms, all of these things which are inherently unpopular, right? I mean, people don't like to have their benefits cut and their taxes raised, even if it's a bitter pill to make the economy stronger in the long run. So the first challenge for him was that his policies were always going to be controversial and sensitive. I think he's hurt himself because his style comes across as so sort of imperious and out of touch. He's made these kind of gaffes where he seems like he's kind of out of touch with the common people. And I think those two things have kind of reinforced each other. The policies he's trying to pursue are inherently difficult and unpopular, but his style is making it worse. As far as the future of his presidency, there's some of the yellow vests are calling for new elections. That seems like a very unlikely prospect. You might see him do another government reshuffle in the next few months. But I think the bigger question is, how does this concession to the protesters affect the other reforms that he's trying to make? And secondly, can the yellow vests become a political movement, a more organized political movement of their own? We will have to see.